Putin's opportunity to really distance himself, which he's already been setting up, from the prior leadership in Russia. Be clear, he talks about the former Russian leadership being gone. We were open to cooperation. We generously gave land to Ukraine, and the leadership sucked. Lenin screwed up. Look at how Putin is really separating himself from the history of Russia. This is really interesting. So I want to see where this goes. But if you're not caught up on that, think about that. I'm posting this all live blog on ehack.com, by the way.
What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom.
Okay, let's be clear. China's growth rate may be exceeding the United States economy, but the United States economy is larger than China.
Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there's no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, It's not possible now.
Можете спросить у него. Да, я думаю, наши...
You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview.
Я
He'll
никогда не
confirm it.
столчу подобного
I
говорить,
wouldn't have
если
said
этого нет.
anything like that if it hadn't
Ладно,
happened.
сейчас невозможно.
Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Послушайте,
Look,
я
I
задал
asked the
вопрос.
question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
Если бы он,
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay,
давайте будем...
fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive, I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
Вы сказали, что...
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all.
Вот и все.
Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on.
Слишком большая страна.
And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO.
Ну, я же видел, как решают.
I will give you another example now concerning
Еще
Ukraine.
один из примеров сейчас приведу, касающийся...
The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote,
Послушно голосуют. Даже если им ничего
even
не
if they do
нравится.
not like
Сейчас
something.
я скажу в этой связи, что происходило с Украиной.
Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say
Мы пытались
anything new.
по-разному выстроить отношения.
Nevertheless, after that, we tried to build relations in different ways.
События
For
были
example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq.
мы
We
очень
were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North
на
Caucasus,
Северном Кавказе. Но все равно продолжали это делать.
but they continue to do it anyway.
Политическая
And political
поддержка,
support,
информационная
information
поддержка,
support, financial
финансовая
support,
поддержка, даже
even
военная
military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus.
террористические формирования в
I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, "It's impossible. Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof.
Он посмотрел.
He looked at it, and you know what he said? I apologize, but that's what happened. I'll quote. He says, "Well, I'm gonna kick their ass." We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply.
Я говорю директору,
I said to the FSB director, write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President?
есть разговор с президентом.
He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply.
В архиве.
We have the answer in the archive.
Пришел ответ.
The CIA replied,
Работали с
we have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it.
смешно.
Just ridiculous.
Ну ладно, мы поняли, что...
Well,
That's a very interesting and big allegation here. Keep in mind what he just said. He just suggested that the CIA responded to the intelligence agency of Russia and said, hey, sorry, we don't agree with what y'all are doing in Russia, so we're supporting your opposition. And Putin is arguing, hey, the U.S. shouldn't be supporting and choosing separatist groups here. Like, we are a free market economy. We should be negotiating. Keep in mind, obviously, this is Putin's POV.
okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government.
Ну, конечно, имелось в виду в данном
Of
случае...
course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus.
Они их называли...
That's who they called the opposition.
Это вот второй момент.
This is the
Третий момент
second
очень
point.
важный.
The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the U.S. missile defense system was created.
Начало.
The beginning.
И мы долго уговаривали.
We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States.
Меня пригласили в
Moreover,
отец Буша.
after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean,
Там состоялась очень серьезная беседа,
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
чтобы
I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that we believe,
как мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Let me ask, what year was this?
ну, я не помню, вот
I don't remember.
в интернете, когда я был.
It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr.
Oh, I can tell you, it was August of 2007. Putin did negotiate with Bush on a missile defense shield. And Bush, according to Reuters, actually called this very innovative. That's where relations were in 2007 between George W. Bush and Putin. Worth keeping that in mind. Putin's not wrong about this part that he's talking about.
It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Мне сказали, это очень интересно.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together. The world will change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says yes, and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told.
Вот в этот кабинет.
I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side.
Министр обороны.
They said to me,
Они мне
"Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great,
Но
but with some exceptions."
So twice you've described U.S. presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who were elected in your telling.
именно так.
That's right.
Конечно,
That's
в
right.
итоге нас послали подальше. Я не буду.
In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential
Наше предложение
conversation.
было отклонено.
But our proposal was declined. That's a
Тогда,
fact.
именно тогда я сказал,
It was right then when I said, "Look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures.
будем создавать такие
We will
удары.
create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems."
Был такой. Мы
The answer was,
а вы
"We are not doing this against you, and you do what you want,"
против нас, не против
assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States.
гиперзвуковые системы.
I said, "Okay, very well."
Межконтинентальные.
That's the way it went. And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day.
Мы
But it wasn't us.
пойти другим.
We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed back.
По поводу расширения НАТО на восток.
Now, about NATO's expansion to the
Какого
east.
НАТО на восток?
Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what?
Сказали, ну,
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand.
5 расширений.
So there were 5 waves of expansion, the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on.
И вот теперь прихожу к главному.
And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later, He exerted pressure on us and we had to agree. It's ridiculous. It's like kindergarten. Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten is this? What kind of people are these? Who are they? You see, they were pressed, they agreed. And then they say, Ukraine won't be in the NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future? Well, they pressed us then. I say, why won't they press you tomorrow? And you'll agree again. Well, it's nonsensical. Who's there to talk to? I just don't understand. We're ready to talk. But with whom? Where are the guarantees? None. So they started to develop the territory of Ukraine. Whatever is there, I have told you the background, how this territory developed, what kind of relations there were with Russia. Every second or third person there has always had some ties with Russia. And during the elections in already independent, sovereign Ukraine, which gained its independence as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, it says that Ukraine is a neutral state, and in 2008, suddenly the doors or gates to NATO were open to it. Oh, come on. This is not how we agreed. Now, all the presidents that have come to power in Ukraine, they relied on electorate with a good attitude to Russia in one way or the other. This is the southeast of Ukraine. This is a large number of people. And it was very difficult to dissuade this electorate, which had a positive attitude towards Russia. Viktor Yanukovych came to power, and how? The first time he won after President Kuchma, they organized a third round, which is not provided for in the constitution of Ukraine. This is a coup d'etat. Just imagine, someone in the United States wouldn't like the outcome.
In 2014?
Before that. No, this was before that. After President Kuchma, Viktor Yanukovych won the elections. However, his opponents did not recognize that victory. The US supported the opposition, and the third round was scheduled. What is this?
Okay, quick catch up, because you might be a little confused by some of this. Putin's kind of bouncing around a little bit. Really quick, 2008, this is after George Bush and Putin were talking missile deal, okay? 2008, Kosovo declares independence from Serbia. Serbia and Russia are like, hey, we're cool. And the US is like, well, we're gonna side with Kosovo. And Russia's like, yo, what the hell? And then at a NATO summit in Bucharest, NATO essentially, with the United States, supports giving Ukraine and Georgia a membership action plan to joining NATO. And that's what Putin is referring to. So if you're confused by that, that gives you a little bit of more color and catch up. Remember earlier he suggested that NATO feels like it's just sort of a puppet of the United States and it does whatever the United States wants. Okay, let's keep going. Full summary so far, ehack.com.
This is a coup. The US supported it, and the winner of the third round came to power. Imagine if in the US something was not to someone's liking, and the third round of election, which the US Constitution does not provide for, was organized. Nonetheless, it was done in Ukraine. Okay, Viktor Yushchenko, who was considered a pro-Western politician, came to power. Fine, we have built relations with him as well. He came to Moscow with visits. We visited Kiev. I visited too. We met in an informal setting. If he's pro-Western, so be it. It's fine. Let people do their job. The situation should have developed inside the independent Ukraine itself. As a result of Kuchma's leadership, things got worse and Viktor Yanukovych came to power after all. Maybe he wasn't the best president and politician. I don't know. I don't want to give assessments. However, the issue of the association with the EU came up. We have always been lenient to this. Suit yourself. But when we read through the Treaty of Association, it turned out to be a problem for us, since we had a free trade zone and open customs borders with Ukraine, which under this association had to open its borders for Europe, which could have led to flooding of our market. We said, no, this is not going to work. We shall close our borders with Ukraine then. The customs borders, that is. Yanukovych started to calculate how much Ukraine was going to gain, how much to lose, and said to his European partners, I need more time to think before signing. The moment he said that, the opposition began to take destructive steps which were supported by the West. It all came down to Maidan and a coup in Ukraine.
So he did more trade with Russia than with the EU. Ukraine did.
Ну, конечно. Ну, конечно, конечно.
Of course. It's not even the matter of trade volume, although for the most part it is. It is the matter of cooperation ties, which the entire Ukrainian economy was based on. The cooperation ties between the enterprises were very close since the times of the Soviet Union. One enterprise there used to produce components to be assembled both in Russia and Ukraine and vice versa. They used to be very close ties. A coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate, the US told us. Calm Yanukovych down, and we will calm the opposition. Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a political settlement. We said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev. What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are? I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
При поддержке ЦРУ, конечно.
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand.
Хотя это серьезно.
We should thank God they didn't let you in. Although it is a serious organization. I understand. My former vis-a-vis in the sense that I served in the first main directorate.
Tucker didn't like that call out, okay? If you Google this, apparently Tucker Carlson tried to join the CIA, but his application was denied, and then he went into journalism. Tucker did not like that at all.
Soviet Union's intelligence service. They have always been our opponents. A job is a job.
Но технически они все сделали правильно.
Technically, they did everything right. They achieved their goal of changing the government. However, from political standpoint, it was a colossal mistake. Surely it was political leadership's miscalculation. They should have seen what it would evolve into.
Итак, в 2014
So, in 2008, the doors of NATO were opened for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the US political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. Besides, we could not leave our brothers in faith, in fact, a part of Russian people, in the face of this war machine.
But that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Спровоцировал конфликт изначально.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite
Keep in mind for a second what Putin just said. He just said that they took Crimea to protect Crimea. Now, Russian forces did occupy Crimea in 2014 to quell protests. During that time, the Republic of Crimea was formed. That declared independence from Ukraine, which was undergoing its coup. And then Russia annexed the new Republic of Crimea. A little bit of background.
That the opposition committed a coup and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement.
Никто не вспоминает.
They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the US know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities and its three guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me, because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions. He was ready to hold an early election, which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost 5 billion. But the political mistake was colossal. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan. Because we agreed with the fact that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, our borders should be along the borders of former Union's republics. We agreed to that. But we never agreed to NATO's expansion, and moreover, we never agreed that Ukraine would be in NATO. We did not agree to NATO bases there without any discussion with us. For decades, we kept asking, don't do this, don't do that. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbass was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to be we're going to act?
We talked about this all the time. We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements. Frankly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to do this, but I was ready to implement them.
Hey, quick note there. That's a big line. When he says, I was ready to implement them, well, let's see how he continues here, but Ukraine has responded to the allegation of Putin saying, hey, you're not applying the Minsk agreements. Ukraine has responded with, hey, well, Russia's not implementing it, so you guys do it first. And Putin did just say, we were ready to implement it. So it's kind of interesting.
These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbass territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbass, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place.
Все постепенно
No,
растет.
nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only.
С помощью
But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action.
Войну начали они.
It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this
Мы не
war.
начинали ее.
And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Do you think you've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet, because one of them is denazification.
Имеется в виду
This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year.
Который завершился в Стамбуле в прошлом году в начале. Но
And it was not our initiative, because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents.
документов
My counterparts in France and Germany said,
в Германии говорили, ну как ты себе представляешь, как они будут подписывать
how can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads?
к голове, к виску.
The troops should be pulled back from Kiev. I said, all right. We withdrew the troops from Kiev.
То, извините, от Киева.
Ooh, that's an interesting line. Okay, wait a minute. There is a very strong Ukrainian argument that has been made, and obviously think about yourself. There's a strong Ukrainian argument made that with the support of US and European weapons, the Ukrainians repelled Russia out of Ukraine, or out of Kiev, right? And Putin right now is saying, we chose to leave Kiev. Interesting.
As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin
Договоренности, достигнутые в Стамбуле.
and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe.
Вот.
That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
Да.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean? What is,
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification.
Искать, как говорят некоторые аналитики.
After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity.
Во главу угла этой идентичности
And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler.
которые сотрудничали с Гитлером. Я уже говорил, что
I have already said that in the early 19th century, when the theorists of independence and sovereignty of Ukraine appeared, they assumed that an independent Ukraine should have very good relations with Russia.
но в силу исторического развития
But due to the historical development, those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted and treated quite brutally, as well as were subject to cruel behavior.
идентичность и вели себя очень жестоко. Это все осталось в памяти.
There were also attempts to destroy their identity.
Когда началась Вторая мировая война, часть этой
All this remained in the memory of the people. When World War II broke out, part of this extremely nationalist elite collaborated with Hitler, believing that he would bring them freedom.
она начала сотрудничать с Гитлером, полагая, что
The German troops, even the SS troops, made Hitler's collaborators do the dirtiest work of exterminating the Polish and Jewish population.
грязную работу
Hence, this brutal massacre of the Polish and Jewish population, as well as the Russian population too.
сионистам, которые с Гитлером сотрудничали. Вот отсюда вот эта жестокая резня.
This was led by the persons who are well known, Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem. And we are constantly told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we approved them. And other countries fight against them. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected. They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany. These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев и русских.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people. They say, no, we are a separate people. Okay, fine. If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Нет, сейчас закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification.
Замалчивается на Западе.
Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries.
Спикер парламента.
The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II?
Выяснилось, что это
Hitler and his accomplices.
Он лично.
It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews.
Они занимались.
The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man.
Плескал этому человеку.
How can this be imagined?
Как это
The
может
president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
еврей по
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very
Можно я
subtle,
скажу, как я думаю?
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий, он очень противный, этот вопрос.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive.
сегодняшнюю Украину
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation.
Целиком выкорчевал
Can we
эту
say that
идеологию,
we have
если
completely
то, что мы
uprooted
видим,
this
происходит
ideology
сегодня?
if what we see is
Вот что
happening
такое
today?
денацификация в нашем
That is what denazification
избавиться от
is
этих
in
людей,
our
которые,
understanding.
э,
We
эту
have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is.
вот
That
что под
is
этим
what we mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine,
будет запрещено.
including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carlson, we agreed on that.
Это
This, it
оказывается,
turns out, can be done during the negotiation process.
здесь нет
And there's
ничего
nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism?
государству позволено
It is not, is it?
нацизм.
That is it.
Ведь нет, правда? Вот и всё.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine?
on talks, we're going to keep going in a moment. I got to catch up a couple things. Okay, yes, Ukraine does have a history of collaborating with Hitler. That is true. There are individuals who have statues, historic Ukrainian individuals, who had ties to Hitler, who have statues still in Ukraine. That is true. About 56 to 140,000 Jews currently live in Ukraine. That is true. So far, Putin has not answered the question about would you be satisfied with the territory you have now. Then Putin says, hey, there's still proponents of Nazism today. Consider Zelensky giving a standing ovation to a Nazi in the Canadian Parliament. Okay, this is also true, but the purpose of that speech was for unification. Putin saw that, though, as supporting Nazism. This person, Yaroslav Hunka, was somebody who worked for the German Waffenschutzstaffel. That's the German SS. And yes, people in Parliament did stand to clap for that person who fought for the Nazis. I think that's important detail. Let's keep going.
Ukraine peace talks.
Они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций, сложных.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Ну да, он финансирует.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
Нет, мы не разговаривали. Но у нас есть.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
That was with Bush.
Yes.
Да. Вот можно спросить у всех. Они же
You can
все
ask all of them.
здоровы.
All of them are safe and sound, thank God.
Бывший президент.
The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador.
Они все свидетели этих разговоров.
They were all witnesses to these conversations.
То же самое,
Ask
если
them.
вам интересно, что ответить.
Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
А что решить? Все очень...
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat,
Есть контакты по линии там различных.
we have contacts through various agencies.
Я вам скажу, что мы говорим на эту тему.
I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what
Вы
messages do you
собираетесь
get back?
поставить такое-то оружие на Украину.
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid. Please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist.
Well, not just that, but also the whole World War III narrative that Russia has nukes and therefore we have to fight Russia to keep them weak, which is basically, it's a proxy war against Russia, right? We fund and supply Ukrainians. Ukrainian people give their lives to keep Russia essentially distracted or weak or crippled or whatever. And the idea is, therefore, Americans will be safe. That's the idea, right? It's much more than just Poland. It's the West.
Behavior is. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Только в одном случае, если со стороны...
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat-mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent. And you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Абсолютно, это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the question.
Никаким аналитиком.
You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
Sounds reasonable.
Есть, конечно, средства.
There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow, Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow, Russia will use that. No, the day after tomorrow. So what?
Выбить из налогоплательщиков.
In order to extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war. The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort or U.S. soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
Yeah, so far this is reiterating exactly what we said. Essentially, proxy war on the idea of they're going to use strategic nukes. It's interesting to see that actually all play out here in this discussion. This is fascinating. It's getting good now.
Это провокация.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that.
Американские солдаты должны воевать.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place and mercenaries from Georgia in third place.
Безусловно.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for?
территории. У вас нечем заниматься.
thousands of miles away from your national territory.
На границе полно. Проблемы
Don't you have anything better to do?
с государством.
You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine?
Понимая ситуацию, которая складывается.
Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end?
К здравому смыслу.
And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions.
Мне кажется, что это гораздо умнее.
It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up?
This, by the way, is like such a burn on the American political regime today. He's kind of, Putin's good. Like he's really good at sort of manipulating, or at least I should say, explaining himself. You know, some things he's saying are right, some things are a little stretched. Obviously, we know that. But let's just be clear and neutral about this. Everybody in America is like, we have too much debt and we have a crisis at the border. Democrats believe that, Republicans believe that. He's taking a knife, putting it in that wound, and he's twisting it like an hour and a half into this. Smart. It's kind of like he got everybody interested, and now he's starting to twist that knife. This is pretty good.
Nord Stream.
You for sure.
Nord
I was
Stream.
busy that day. Nate, do you have? I did not blow up
То есть
Nord
у вас-
Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби. У вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Вы знаете, я не
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
Good
В
question.
войне пропаганды очень сложно.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
Европейских
The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak.
Мы можем
We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results.
планировать так ясно, что
It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
Ну, меня это тоже удивляет.
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction.
Объяснить.
After all, it is not only about Nord Stream 1, which was blown up, and the Nord Stream 2 was damaged, but one pipe is safe and sound and gas can be supplied to Europe through it. But Germany does not open it. We are ready, please.
Но Германия же не открывает его.
There's another route through Poland called Yamal Europe, which also allows for large flow. Poland has closed it, but Poland packs from the German hand. It receives money from the pan-European funds, and Germany is the main donor to these pan-European funds. Germany feeds Poland to a certain extent, and they close their route to Germany. Why? I don't understand. Ukraine, to which the Germans supply weapons and give money. Germany is the second sponsor of the United States in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. There are 2 gas routes through Ukraine. They simply closed one route, the Ukrainians. Open the second route and please get gas from Russia. They do not open it. Why don't the Germans say, look guys, we give you money and weapons, open up the valve, please, let the gas from Russia pass through for us. We're buying liquefied gas at exorbitant prices in Europe, which brings...
Quick note, Putin's right here. Pipe A of the Nord Stream 2 is inoperable. Pipe B is undamaged.
the level of our competitiveness and economy in general down to zero. Do you want us to give you money? Let us have the decent existence. Make money for our economy, because this is where the money we give you comes from. They refuse to do so. Why? Ask them. That is what is like in their heads. Those are highly incompetent people.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side, do you think?
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. But it is still one and the same head. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now. But I think that thanks to honest journalism, this work is akin to work of the doctors. This could somehow be remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted?
Okay, here we go. We're getting into talk about BRICS, the dollar reserve currency. We got to talk about that. That's important. I just want to clarify the pipe issue really quickly. Okay, 3 of the pipes that were ruptured by the blasts, 2 of them hit the Nord Stream 1, and then 1 of the Nord Stream 2 pipelines were broken. 1 of them remains undamaged. Obviously, though, European countries have decided not to essentially, quote unquote, subsidize Russia by buying natural gas from them or oil or otherwise. Okay, now, this is big, okay? This has to do with BRICS. This has to do with the dollar reserve currency status, the petrodollar. Basically, we trade in dollars around the global international economy, specifically oil. There is this uprising of potentially Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Okay, that would be a BRICS potential currency. Remember, we kicked Russia out of the SWIFT interbanking messaging system, and they're like, yo, you're kicking us out of everything. Maybe it's time for a new currency, right? Okay, great. Let's get into it.
Currency, how have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place?
Oh, and quickly, there are huge articles in Foreign Affairs, Economist, and otherwise that say sanctions so far, economic sanctions, the SWIFT bans, everything, have basically done nothing to damage Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised if Putin just laughs this off.
In the world.
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the U.S. political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world.
Yeah, true.
Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission.
Как только политическое руководство приняло решение использовать доллар в качестве инструмента политической борьбы,
Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world.
поэтому американцы
As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power.
и огромные
I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake.
сокращаются запасы доллара сейчас. Все смотрят на то, что происходит, и начинают искать возможности.
Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes grave concern and sends a signal to the whole world.
В России
What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros.
Okay, quickly, there is some truth to this. Remember, Saudi Arabia did partner with China to start settling oil trades in the yuan instead of the dollar. We are seeing some of this sort of pullback and getting away from reliance on the dollar. We are seeing some of that. The dollar is still supreme out of all of them, keeping in mind that also as the U.S. economy caps out on interest rates, what you'll probably see is the dollar actually fall unless the US is the only country that stays out of recession and everybody else goes into recession. Then the dollar could be the strongest loser, so to speak, out of all dollars. But Putin's not wrong here. The United States will not stop printing money. We won't have deflation in America because we're just going to keep making more dollars. That's just the game. It is a Ponzi. It's just the game that it is. So Putin's not wrong about that.
с третьими странами. Значит,
US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar.
США приняли решение ограничить наши расчеты в долларах.
We had no such intention.
Полная дурь.
It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%.
Сейчас 34%
Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles and about as much,
столько же 30.
a little over 34% in yuan.
Зачем Соединенные Штаты это сделали?
Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit.
Думали, наверное, что
They
всё
probably thought it would lead to full
Yuan quickly is Chinese.
collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan.
Yeah.
Do you even
Saudi Arabia.
realize what is going on or not?
Ну, вы понимаете, что это такое происходит?
Does anyone in the United States realize this?
Понимаете это в тех же Соединенных Штатах?
Well, let just be fair for a moment. Again, remember what I said about the US dollar being so supreme. Just quick little screenshot. Quick screenshot. US dollar is the blue line as a percentage of foreign currency reserves. Euro is the red line. US and Euro are allies. Okay, then you get to the little green line down there. That's other. And then you got like the Japanese yen and the pound sterling like way at the bottom. So, yeah, the dollar's still pretty damn strong.
What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this.
То, что всегда...
Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US.
Что такое доллар?
You're killing it with your own hands.
Убивает.
I think that's I think that's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being
There it is.
completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Эти страшилки нам...
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. Well, one of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the U.S. government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
Сейчас скажу, но чтобы закончить предыдущий вопрос.
I will tell you, but let me finish the previous thought. We, together with my colleague and friend, President Xi Jinping, set a goal to reach $200 billion of mutual trade with China this year. We have exceeded this level. According to our figures, our bilateral trade with China totals already $230 billion, and the Chinese statistics says it is $240 billion. One more important thing, our trade is well balanced, mutually complementary in high-tech, energy, scientific research and development. It is very balanced. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022, it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces.
Quickly, it's just worth mentioning, we just heard Putin argue that the UN is illegitimate. The Russian Federation is part of the United Nations. Clearly, he believes that it's mostly driven by the United States and therefore manipulated by the United States. One of the reasons, though, that they stay in the United Nations, this is important to know, one of the reasons Russia stays a member of the United Nations is because they are a chartered permanent it's called the P5, member of the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council, each P5 member, has full veto power over what the United Nations Security Council can do. The 5 members are China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So one of the reasons, in case you're wondering, well, why is Russia part of the UN if they think the UN is illegitimate, is because they're part of the P5 and they have a permanent veto to overrule anything the UN Security Council wants to do.
This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing.
By the way, I'm writing all of this down on ehack.com. The whole interview, I kind of write my notes on ehack and then I bring some stuff up here.
Under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner. Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident. You just asked me if another leader comes and changes something. It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person. I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States, he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much. I assure you that this is not the case. I think he made a lot of mistakes with regard to Russia, too. I told you about 2008 and the decision in Bucharest to open the NATO's doors for Ukraine and so on. That happened during his presidency. He actually exercised pressure on the Europeans. But in general, on a personal human level, I had a very good relationship with him.
Quickly, that's the reference to the 2008 Kosovo declaration when we had the independence between the two. And basically, the U.S. worked to give a path towards membership to NATO through the Membership Action Plan. We touched on that earlier.
He was no worse than any other American or Russian or European politician. I assure you, he understood what he was doing as well as others. I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader. It is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse. But if, in the end, one comes to the awareness that the world has been changing due to the objective circumstances, and that one should be able to adapt to them in time, using the advantages that the U.S. still has today, then perhaps something may change.
Wow.
Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the U.S. a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the 5th place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time. The tools that U.S. uses don't work. Well, one has to think about what to do. If this realization comes to the ruling elites, then yes, then the first person of the state will act in anticipation of what the voters and the people who make decisions at various levels expect from this person. Then maybe something will change.
But you're describing two different systems. You say that the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
Wait a minute. That is a big question right there about, is Biden actually running the government? Oh, I cannot wait to see Putin's response to this. Quick pitch, I gotta throw it in there. Thank you so much for being 150,000 strong on this live stream. If you wanna subscribe and learn a whole lot more about me, either my startups or what we do at meetkevin.com or whatever, hit subscribe. I break down news here totally for free and at ehack.com. Love y'all, thank you for the support. Let's keep watching.
Америка сложная страна, такая очень, с одной стороны, консервативная.
I don't know. America is a complex country, conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself? Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it. Certainly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats. And within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions. Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think among other
Quick note, he kind of slid in a slam on what just happened with the Supreme Court today, where basically what he's saying is, why is the Supreme Court even debating the fact that a state can just pick to take somebody off the ballot? That was his implication. I made a full breakdown of that as well. You could watch that later.
things because excessive production capacities were created. During the confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities, and to subdue them in a divided form, to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world. Look at how Indonesia is developing. 600 million people. Where can we get away from that? Nowhere. We just have to assume that Indonesia will enter, it is already in, the club of the world's leading economies, no matter who likes it or dislikes it. Yes, we understand and are aware that in the United States, despite all the economic problems, the situation is still normal, with the economy growing decently. The GDP is growing by 2.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But if we want to ensure the future, then we need to change our approach to what is changing. As I already said, the world would nevertheless change, regardless of how the developments in Ukraine end. The world is changing. In the United States themselves, experts are writing that the United States are nonetheless gradually changing their position in the world. It is your experts who write that. I just read them. The only question is how this would happen, painfully and quickly, or gently and gradually. And this is written by people who are not anti-American. They simply follow global development trends. That's it. And in order to assess them and change policies, we need people who think, look forward, can analyze and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders.
I just have to ask, you've said clearly that NATO expansion eastward is a violation of the promise you all were made in 1990. It's a threat to your country. Right before you sent troops into Ukraine, the Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
Мы просто, я еще раз повторяю, мы многократно предлагали...
I repeat once again, we have repeatedly proposed to seek a solution to the problems that arose in Ukraine after 2014 coup d'etat through peaceful means. But no one listened to us. And moreover, the Ukrainian leaders who were under the complete US control suddenly declared that they would not comply with the Minsk agreements. They disliked everything there and continued military activity in that territory.
Шло освоение этой территории натовскими военными структурами. Под видом различных центров.
And in parallel, that territory was being exploited by NATO military structures under the guise of various personnel training and retraining centers. They essentially began to create bases there. That's all. Ukraine announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality, while passing the laws that limit the rights of non-titular nationalities in Ukraine. Ukraine, having received all these southeastern territories as a gift from the Russian people, suddenly announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality in that territory. Is that normal? All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a frontline soldier. I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. He talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine. He deceived his voters.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world?
Worth quickly noting, Putin here basically suggested, hey, it's easier for Zelensky to align with the US and to kind of turn a blind eye to neo-Nazis because that will keep him in power. That's what Putin is alleging of Zelensky.
Can he do that, do you think?
А почему нет? Он же
Why not? He considers himself head of state. He won the elections. Although we believe in Russia that the coup d'etat is the primary source of power for everything that happened after 2014. And in this sense, even today, government is flawed. But he considers himself the president, and he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not? He can. We negotiated with Ukraine in Istanbul. We agreed. He was aware of this. Moreover, the negotiation group leader, Mr. Arahamiya is his last name, I believe still heads the faction of the ruling party, the party of the president in the Rada. He still heads the presidential faction in the Rada, the country's parliament. He still sits there. He even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia. And we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not? Further on, President of Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us. Let him cancel that decree, and that's it. We have never refused negotiations, indeed. We hear all the time, is Russia ready? Yes, we have not refused. It was them who publicly refused.
Keep in mind, Putin said in this very interview, he said, hey, I'll negotiate as soon as you stop supplying weapons. As soon as you, America, stop supplying weapons, this will be resolved in a few weeks, and then we can negotiate. So, in the same interview, Putin is saying two different things. Keep that in mind.
Well, let him cancel his decree and enter into negotiations. We have never refused. And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, seems ridiculous and very sad to me. Because, as Mr. Arakamiya put it, we could have stopped those hostilities with war a year and a half ago already. But the British persuaded us and we refused this. Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
That's a good question. Where do you think he is and why did he do that?
Hell knows. I don't understand it myself. There was a general starting point. For some reason, everyone had the illusion that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield. Because of arrogance, because of a pure heart, but not because of a great mind.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as Orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You've said you're Orthodox. What does that mean for you? You're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know, as I already mentioned, in 988, Prince Vladimir himself was baptized following the example of his grandmother, Princess Olga. And then he baptized his squad. And then, gradually, over the course of several years, he baptized all the Rus. It was a lengthy process, from pagans to Christians. It took many years. But in the end, this orthodoxy, Eastern Christianity, deeply rooted itself in the consciousness of the Russian people. When Russia expanded and absorbed other nations who profess Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, Russia has always been very loyal to those people who profess other religions. This is her strength. This is absolutely clear. And the fact is that the main postulates, main values are very similar, not to say the same, in all world religions I've just mentioned, and which are the traditional religions of the Russian Federation, Russia. By the way, Russian authorities were always very careful about the culture and religion of those people who came into the Russian Empire. This, in my opinion, forms the basis of both security and stability of the Russian statehood. All the peoples inhabiting Russia basically consider it their motherhood. If, say, people move over to you or to Europe from Latin America, an even clearer and more understandable example, people come, but yet they have come to you or to European countries from their historical homeland. And people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family, and our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family, but everyone has his, her own family. And this is the basis of our society. And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other,
Если мы говорим, что Родина и семья
it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland.
устойчивое будущее для всей страны.
That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
But can I say that the one way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
Wow.
Очень легко. Если речь идет о защите себя и своей
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland.
начались события.
We won't attack anyone.
С госпереворота и с начала боевых действий на Донецке.
When did the developments in Ukraine start?
На Донбассе. Вот с чего. И мы
Since the coup
защищаем
d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future.
Она не во внешних проявлениях, и в том, чтобы ходить
As for religion in general,
или бить головой в пол. Она в сердце.
you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человекоориентированная. И
Was that just a slam against Islam?
Достоевский
It is in the
очень
heart.
известен на
And our culture is so human-oriented.
гений.
Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul.
Русский человек, российский человек, он думает больше о вечном, он думает больше о ценности.
After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think more about the eternal, about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all.
Возможность вот сегодняшнему этому золотому миллиарду.
I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on.
Что мы вроде как выглядим одинаково, но сознание.
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same, that our minds
So
are
do you
built a
see
little
the
different.
supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что
No, to be honest, I don't think
сообщество
so.
развивается вот по своим внутренним
My
законам.
opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws are what they are.
Так было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind.
Развивались,
Some
размножались,
nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to.
Наверное, не нужно приводить эти примеры, но начиная
There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire.
человечества каждый
It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind.
потенциал варваров постепенно накапливался.
Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and begun to develop economically, as we would say today.
Экономически они стали укрепляться.
This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans.
500 лет. Этот процесс.
However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart.
В сегодняшней ситуации
The
разница
difference with what is happening now
процессы изменений.
is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
The AI. I'm not sure if he's talking about artificial intelligence, but that might be what he's leading into, because Putin's kind of suggesting, hey, because of social media today, everything's moving a lot faster. All right.
меня все более
You're
сложные.
asking increasingly more complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big numbers, big data, and AI. Mankind is currently facing many threats. Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
Илон Маск вводил уже чип в мозг какого-то человека.
What do you think of that?
Ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска остановит.
Well, I think
Wait, let's be clear. He did implant a chip in someone else's human brain, not in Elon's brain. I haven't heard that part, but I have heard the chip has gone into somebody else's brain. That was a little bit of a, potentially a dangling participle there.
there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. Nevertheless, you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий.
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics or in AI. One can make an approximate prediction of what will happen.
Угрозу своему существованию от ядерного оружия все начали обладатели ядерного
Once mankind felt an existential threat coming from nuclear weapons, all nuclear nations began to come to terms with one another since they realized the negligent use of nuclear weaponry could drive humanity to extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые невозможно.
It is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя.
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32.
Smart.
And he's been in prison for almost a year.
Smart,
This is
Tucker.
a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
So smart.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил. Но
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner.
что мы
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that
исключаем того, что мы можем это
if our
сделать
partners
при
take reciprocal steps.
встречном движении со стороны наших
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services.
представителей специальных служб.
Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
На то, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this
Мы
issue.
готовы ее решать.
We are willing to solve it.
Есть определенные условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services
по
channels.
партнерским каналам между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries.
Quickly, that was really smart of Tucker. Either he wins the release, which then he's a national hero, Tucker, or at least he tried, and now everybody in the mainstream media is like, damn, that was a class act. That was really smart by Tucker. Brilliant.
One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes it, and it's not my business, But what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy. He's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy. And everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true. And everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Вы знаете, можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что не шпион.
You can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy, but there are certain things provided by law. If person gets secret information and does that in conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative. Considering the sheer fact this is qualified as espionage, the fact has been proven as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you suggesting that he was working for the U.S. government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторяю еще.
I don't know who he was working for. But I would like to reiterate that getting classified information in secret is called espionage. And he was working for the U.S. Special Services, some other agencies. I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information. It is up to special services to come to an agreement. Some groundwork has been laid. There are people who, in our view, are not connected with special services. Let me tell you a story about a person serving a sentence in an allied country of the US. That person, due to patriotic sentiments, eliminated a bandit in one of the European capitals. During the events in the Caucasus, do you know what he was doing? I don't want to say that, but I will do it anyway. He was laying our soldiers, taken prisoner, on the road and then drove his car over their heads. What kind of person is that? Can he even be called human? But there was a patriot who eliminated him in one of the European capitals. Whether he did it of his own volition or not, that is a different question.
Yeah, but Evan Gershkovich didn't do that. I mean, that's a completely different. I mean, this is a 32-year-old newspaper reporter.
He committed something different. He's not just a journalist. I reiterate, he's a journalist who was secretly getting confidential information. Yes, it is different, but still, I'm talking about other people who are essentially controlled by the U.S. authorities, wherever they are serving a sentence. There is an ongoing dialogue between the special services. This has to be resolved in a calm, responsible, and professional manner.
I think it's so interesting how much pushback Putin is actually giving here. He's really trying to explain. Putin could have easily said, hey, we're negotiating that and cut that story. But Putin's actually going deep into this. Hey, this person violated our laws. This person committed espionage. This person went way deeper than you think, and we caught him red-handed. And what that does now is it creates some doubt in people who are hearing the story only from an American point of view. That's the point of Putin sort of speaking, is now you hear the other side. It's like, oh, okay, well, who is right? Very interesting.
They're keeping in touch, so let them do their work. I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovich, may return to his motherland. By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia.
Wait. Did Tucker actually mention Evan's name? because Putin rolled that off pretty smoothly. He knows exactly who this person is.
We want the U.S. Special Services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals our special services are pursuing. We are ready to talk. Moreover, the talks are underway. And there have been many successful examples of these talks crowned with success. Probably this is going to be crowned with success as well. But we have to come to an agreement.
I hope you let him out. Mr. President, thank you.
I also want him to return to his homeland at last. I'm absolutely sincere. But let me say once again, the dialogue continues. The more public we render things of this nature, the more difficult it becomes to resolve them. Everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's true with the war, though, also. I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? And how motivated are you just to call the U.S. government and say, let's come to terms?
I already said that we did not refuse to talk. We are willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the U.S. It is evident. I do not want you to take it as if I'm looking for a strong word or an insult, but we both understand what is happening. The financial support, $72 billion was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come. Dozens of billions of US dollars are going to Ukraine. There's a huge influx of weapons. In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree. We did not refuse.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult because you already said correctly, it's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров,
well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out. It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is it. However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of the situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself said, we were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. Well, you missed it, you made a mistake. Let them get back to that, that is all. Why do we have to bother ourselves and correct somebody else's mistakes? I know one can say it is our mistake. It was us who intensified the situation and decided to put an end to the war that started in 2014 in Donbass, as I have already said, by means of weapons. Let me get back to furthering history. I already told you this.
мы с вами сейчас обсуждали.
We were just discussing it.
Вернемся в 91
Let us go back
год,
to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state.
Потому что
Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014.
бессмысленно, правда?
It is pointless, though, isn't it? We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stopped negotiations.
Ошибка?
Is it a mistake?
Исправь.
Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
Я же сказал.
I said, let them think how to do it with dignity.
Как сделать это?
There are options if there is a will.
Варианты есть. Но если такое желание.
Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield.
Добиться стратегического поражения России, поражения на
Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all.
по-моему,
In my opinion,
невозможно по
it
определению.
is impossible by
Этого не будет никогда.
definition. It is never going to happen.
Мне кажется, сейчас
It seems to me that now those who are in power in the West have come to realize this as well.
это осознание пришло. Подумайте теперь.
If the realization has set in, they have to think what to do next.
Больше того,
We are ready for this dialogue.
Would you be willing to say, congratulations, NATO, you won, and just keep the situation where it is now?
ну, вы знаете, это предмет переговоров.
You know, it is a subject matter for the negotiations. No one is willing to conduct, or to put it more accurately,
Или, точнее сказать, хотят.
they're willing but do not know how to do it.
Я не только вижу,
I know they want
я
to.
знаю, что
It is not just I see it, but I know they do want it. But they're struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that. It is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how to reverse the situation. We're not against it. It would be funny if it were not so sad.
Да, было бы смешно, если бы не было так грустно.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Истерика, там, внутренние проблемы.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the
Рано
current
или
situation,
поздно все равно мы договоримся. И
but the relations between the two peoples will be
может, даже
rebuilt
странно в
anyway.
сегодняшней ситуации прозвучит.
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
Между народами восстановится. Потребуется много времени.
I'll give you very unusual examples.
Совсем приведу вам необычный пример.
There is a combat encounter on the
На поле
battlefield.
боя
Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life.
Украинская
Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive."
наши солдаты им кричат.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying,
Вдруг оттуда
"Russians, do not surrender."
на хорошем русском
And all of them
и
perished.
не сдаются.
They still identify themselves as Russian.
Они до сих пор русскими себя ощущают. В этом смысле то, что
What is
происходит,
happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war.
и все
Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever.
растащили
No,
одну
they
часть.
will be reunited.
Нет,
The unity is still there.
воссоединение произойдет. Оно никуда и не делось.
Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Растаскивают русскую православную церковь.
Because it brings together not only the territory,
Объединяет не территорию.
it brings together our souls.
И никто
No one will be able
не
to
удастся
separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?